Hello, and welcome back to the Long Distance Love Bombs podcast. I am your host, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg, and my guest today is my pal, Holiday Phillips. Holiday has a diploma in human resources management. She's a certified coach. She's a certified insights discovery facilitator. She's a certified instructor for mindfulness in prison. She studied social and political sciences at Cambridge. She studied sociology at Bristol. She spent a decade as a leader working with some of the world's most renowned technology corporations and companies on inclusion and diversity and equality. She's wonderful. She's wonderful. And in this conversation, we dive in probably the first 15, maybe 10 minutes. We talk about her new initiation into motherhood, what she has learned from it, how it has affected her. We talk about love, we talk about heart, and then we abruptly transition to a different topic, which is essentially how do you make sense and how do you ascribe meaning in a world that is filled with various crises. We talk about the pandemic, we talk about the recent war in the Ukraine, and we kind of dive deep, wax philosophic about the state of the world, society, civilization, history, freedom, responsibility, and what we do with all of that. I mean, things are pretty crazy all the time if you really think about what's going on the planet, in our history, in our civilization. And so how do you, as an individual with some amount of agency, how do you make sense of that? How do you find your center? How do you live a life of meaning and purpose without getting lost amidst the storms and the sea change and the rest of it? So that's what we talked about. And if you'd like, you can find Holiday online and on Instagram, and you can work with her as an individual, or if you have a company that desires her input and assistance, you can get in touch with her directly and just get in her world. I adore her. She and I hosted a retreat together in England a couple years ago. So I've seen her work, I've been around her, and I really think she's one of the good ones. I love her brain, I love her heart, and I think that you will too. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Holiday Phillips. All right, Holiday Phillips, I've pushed the buttons. We are underway. It's good to see you, friend. I I always am excited when your name is in my calendar because I've known you for years. For those listening, we ran a retreat together years ago in England, and I'm just a fan of yours. I just like you. So welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
Holiday, for those listening who don't know and adore you in the ways that I do, how do you describe yourself? Like, who are you? What's your deal? I mean, even that's perhaps a relevant question now of like, who are you now since we've last spoken? And how's this last year gone?
I don't know how you find, but I find that a really difficult question to answer. So even as you're asking me, I can feel myself kind of like trying to catalog, like, how do I best describe myself? Because there's so many ways into the question. So let me just roll with what comes. First and foremost, who I am is mother to my son, Ocean. That's the most important thing in my life. And he's 18 months. So that's new, I guess, since we last spoke on the podcast. And there's a whole load of stuff we can talk about that and motherhood as initiation and why that's the most important thing in my life beyond just the love I feel for him, but how significant motherhood has been for me, at least. And then in terms of what I do rather than who I am, the most succinct way I have found to describe what I do is that I hold space or create experiences for people to be in deep inquiry. So whether that's through my writing or through conversations or through coaching, where I work with people one-on-one or in groups, or my work with organizations, I'm always really just holding space and creating experiences for people to be in deep inquiry about the questions that really matter. to them or just generally. Underneath all of that is really the truth that I have no answers, but I am deeply enthusiastic seeker. And so my soul's calling, which is to seek truth, very, very fortunately and gratefully manifests in the work that I do, which is holding space for others to do that.
I think that's one reason that we get along so well, is that we're both very curious. We like learning, but also recognize that we don't really know anything at all in the grand scheme of things. I recall when I was doing this retreat in Costa Rica a couple months ago, we had this group Q&A, and somebody asked, what is one thing that you know to be true? And I said, I don't know shit. Like I know that to be true in my bones. And I love that you are a facilitator of inquiry. So Holiday Phillips, you opened the door to motherhood. So I feel like I would love to know more about why that role is so important to you, or how has it changed your identity over the last year? What's the transformation or evolution that's occurred?
So really interestingly, as you said that question that someone asked you, like, what's one thing that you know to be true? Immediately what dropped into my mind was that I love my son. That was just it. And I can't explain it, but it's like, in some ways, and you're a scientist, it's the most rational thing, because my evolutionary impulse is to keep him alive. So it's really going to help if I like him, because I'm going to protect him. So maybe it's just a biological thing, but you know me, I don't like to just take a kind of scientific rationalist perspective. I operate from the heart. So what I feel is like there's almost an otherworldly experience I have when I think about him or when I'm with him, that feels so pure and so deep and so true, that it's like, actually, I do know that to be true. I do know that to be true, that if this is what this is what love is, the way that I feel for him, this is what love is. And I can't put many more words around it, except for that it is the most divine, ecstatic experience that I can ever imagine. In fact, the 4 months after he was born, what I can explain it as is similar to a psychedelic experience. Like I felt elevated above, or like a really prolonged ecstasy trip. Like I felt elevated above the plane of human experience, because it was just so intense, I guess. So in that sense, I think when I talk about motherhood as initiation, for me, it has been an initiation into deeper understanding of what love is. I think if I think about it with my mind, it's that real knowing that I am not the most important person in the world anymore to me. And I don't think of myself as a particularly selfish person, but sometimes, like, let me say, the other day, I got really I have grief sometimes about losing the freedom that I had in my 20s. I mean, I had the best time in my 20s. I was was working in London. I was living that kind of like really busy life. Me and my crew from university, we all lived like a few roads away from each other. We were partying all the time. Like it was the best. And we were so free and we had no responsibility. And I was really, on a deeper spiritual level, I think I was pretty bereft. But and just day to day, I was really happy. So sometimes now when I'm like, oh, I got to get up in the night to change a nappy, and I never sleep anymore, and I'm always tired, and like my body is not my own anymore, I really miss those times. And that's also true. But what I know now, or what is true now, is that I am no longer the most important person in my life. And that's a very, very different way to exist in the world than I'd experienced before. And so to kind of like cap it off, I think a lot about there being stages of life that aren't necessarily linked to age, although they may be more so for women. And it's that transition from like maiden to mother and then to crone. And I think it's a really, we in kind of modern Western societies have really lost the initiation process of what happens when you move from maiden to mother, where you're no longer the most important person, to crone, where you are there. They call it crone, right? But it's like elder. And so we kind of have to muddle through it on our own. But that's what's happening. Like I've moved into a different life stage and everything is now different.
Yeah. It sounds like there's some element of ego death with you as well, of like, oh, I'm not that person anymore, and I'm not the most important thing on the planet anymore. And part of me doesn't love that, but there's another part of me that thinks this is the best thing to ever happen to me, and I'm so grateful to be here, and long may it continue. My mom sent me this thing the other day. It's like a meme. You know, as mom, like you're going to be this kind of, moms do this stuff, right? You just like send stuff to your kids. And one of them was something like having a child is realizing that your heart is no longer in your chest, but it's like in another person walking around the world. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective. Like when you said that you've lost part of yourself, it's like now in another entity. Like you took that piece of you and put it into somebody else. And when you see that person, or when you hold that child, it's like, does that make sense? It's kind of like a mystical idea, I suppose.
It's beautiful. And the other side to that, which I think I'm still only at the beginning of experiencing, because he's a baby, right? So his what he is doing is relatively limited. But the other part about having your heart outside of your body, which to a certain extent I think happens in romantic relationships when you're in love, is that the capacity to break your heart is no longer only in your power. So it's like the pain that I feel when I hear Ocean cry is excruciating. And it's like that there's an element of, it's particularly, you know, when you think about parents of teenagers, I mean, the angst and the pain and all of this, it's like you're also opening yourself up to deeper and deeper heartbreak, because you're not only responsible for this being, but there's another person who owns your heart, let's say, and they will forever. I think that's the other piece that I think has really been an initiation. First of all, the awareness of my own mortality, you know, to know that this other being is going to outlive me really made me feel this closeness to death, let's say, because I'm no longer the kind of bottom of the chain. I'm on my way. I'm on my way out and up. But also this, what was the other thing? I can't remember what the other thing was because I got a lot stuck on the death. But yeah, this closeness to death, that's another big initiation that we need to go through in life. The closer and closer that we get to death is to realize how transient our existence is. And when we're young, you know, really young, we don't feel that. We shouldn't really be feeling that because that's not where we are. But as we march closer and closer to the end, you know, life becomes perhaps more meaningful. I'm not sure.
Okay, Holiday, I'm going to transition the conversation now to a different topic. And before we started recording, I asked if there's anything that's really lighting you up at the moment. And I threw some ideas at you. And you said, yes, actually, there is an idea that I would love to discuss. And I think to summarize it, it was making meaning in times of crisis, something along those lines. And so I don't necessarily know where to begin with that, but is there a starting point for that, or what's got you thinking about that idea? I mean, obviously the world's pretty fucked up, but.
Yeah. So I was listening to, I can't remember who I was listening to speak, but they were saying that every age of humanity thinks that the age that they are in is the most dramatic. Perhaps we might attribute that to the fact that every age is the most complex age that there has been, right? Because as we're evolving, we're just becoming more and more complex. So in that sense, there's more capacity for drama, we might say. So maybe what I'm saying is just speaking from that perspective, but I really do think that the time that we are in, the like polycrises, the multiple crises that are happening and the relentlessness with which it is happening and the severity of the potential consequences feels like a peak. It's however long, 100 years since the last pandemic and 40 years since maybe I wouldn't say that we're a serious threat of nuclear war, but we are at a different level of threat of war in Europe than we've seen in 40 years. So I think we're living in an age of deep crisis, and not to mention ecological crisis. And I think I find myself really tuned in to what my own response to those crises are. And I'm sure that that's represented in how other people feel. So I was thinking a lot recently about how I've responded to these crises. People talk about compassion fatigue. They used to talk about this a lot in the time of World Aid, when there was lots of videos of children starving in Africa on the TV all the time. This is in the late 80s. And people just were kind of like switching the channel. They didn't even feel anything because they had compassion fatigue because they were seeing it too much. I noticed in myself, like when COVID first hit, there's another thread that I'm going to go on from there, which is like really a bit dangerous for me to say, but I'm going to say it, but I'm not going to say it yet. When COVID first hit, I was really like responsive. I was like, wow, this is big and this is intense and all of the things. And then as kind of it went on, I got like intensity fatigue. And then COVID kind of starts to potentially be fading out. And then bam, in the UK, it was literally 5 hours after we ended the COVID regulations, war in Ukraine was announced. And the place I found myself going to was nihilism. Like, things are so fucked. I'm just actually not even going to tune in anymore. Like, I could feel that happening in my body and to actually in my mind thinking that this is the most rational response. Like, things are so complicated and seemingly hopeless that the most rational response is to be like, nothing matters anyway. And I think that's a response to the chaos. It's like, in extreme chaos, the safest ground is to put yourself in a place of saying, well, none of this really matters, because if we were consistently open to it, it would be too painful. So that's my first place that I go. My next place that I go is then hedonism. It's like, well, if nothing really matters, then I'm here for a good time, not a long time. So I'm just going to really enjoy myself. And God, I wish I could stay in that place because that's the best. But then kind of like after a while, like my little heart and my little conscience comes knocking and is like, hello, like, I think actually we're meant to be here to be here for each other and, love and all of that. And I'm like, shut the fuck up. But I can't stop listening to that little voice. And so I tend to go on this cyclical journey where I then am like, okay, there's some pull within humanity that just cannot tune in and drop out. Like we can't. And my best guess on that is because we are so interconnected that when another is hurting, we can't not but hurt, even if we wish we wouldn't. And so but I have come to a place in myself where it's like, I can no longer make sense of re-engaging from a place of what we might call like classical activism, because I don't see that as a solution to the depth of the crises that we're in. Like, classical activism seeks to fix the problem in front of us, and normally that is with fight or with kind of going in the opposite direction. Like, this is terrible, therefore we need to like squash this and create something new. Capitalism is terrible, therefore we need to squash this and create its opposite, communism. Then we get this another problem coming and coming and coming. So I kind of go to two places. Like, the first place is that we need to change the conversation about how we deal with these crises to a truly radical response. Radical is from the Latin word radix, which means root, and like start to look at what is the root of all of these issues? Like, what is the consciousness of war? What is the consciousness of pandemic? Is complicated because it's more than human, but let's say, like, what is the consciousness of poverty? What's beneath the consciousness of addiction? And try and get to a place where it's like, where are these all connected? And how can I be an agent for change in me, in my own heart, in my own life, rather than trying to fix all of the problems out there? Because I have I have no influence over the conflict in Ukraine. But if I go deep and deep and deep and deep into like, what is underneath this? Well, the desire for, let's say, the desire for power, the desire for dominion, fear. I definitely have those in my heart. The desire for power over another, desire for control over another, fear. And so that's kind of where I get to is like the opposite of nihilism, in fact, which is like, oh, nothing matters, nothing I can do, to like everything matters, because what is manifesting itself in my tiny interactions with my partner and my son or my work is the same thing that is manifesting on this big global stage.
Yeah, I've heard it described as the finite pool of worry. In that, if you imagine you've got a bucket, or I'm holding up a mug, it's like, here's all my worry. And then, the polar bears get some, and the ice caps get some, and Ukraine gets some, and my family gets some, and my job, etc. Like, it's not bottomless, right? Like, there's only so much concern and capacity for concern that I have as an individual. And then once that finite pool of worry is tapped, it's like, as you say, apathy, which I think is projected hopelessness, like despair, despondence. Fuck it, I'm going to smoke all the weed and have all the sex and eat all the chocolate, right? To go to your point about hedonism. And so what is the process that you use to navigate that, to come to a place in yourself, in your life, that you feel good about? And maybe good's the wrong word, but where you feel like, yes, I am on track, I am in integrity, this is the life that I am choosing to consciously live.
So I think that the first thing is that I probably spent about a decade in anguish around this particular question. Like, how can I help? How can I help? What am I supposed to do? There's so much pain, pinging back to can't be bothered to do anything. I spent a decade in like deep, it really, I say, in and out of like deep depressions of like feeling so helpless and hopeless. So that's the first thing. I had to run that pattern until that pattern had just run out in me. And I don't know that I did anything particular, but it ran its course within me until I got to such a point that I was I still go into it now, but it's like in the space of like hours rather than kind of long. I can track it. I think that it's maybe more like a set of principles that I learned and started to really feel in my body that changed things for me. And it's potentially, to your point, you were saying something a little bit earlier about, what did you say about the ego? You said it's like quite ego. You said something about it being quite ego. Death ego. Yeah. That was my motherhood ego death. Okay, yeah. So I think for me it was a steady process of, through whatever work I was doing, these tiny little ego deaths and I'm sure there's loads more to come, that allow me to see things through a different lens. So I've been doing a lot of reading of Vedic scriptures. My mum's Indian, as you know, and we come from a very deeply spiritual lineage. So we kind of learned all the stories when they were young, and then I forget them and I revisit them. And one of the teachings in the Vedic texts, in the Bhagavad Gita particularly, is about this idea of yugas. So they're like ages or epochs. There are 4 ages. There are said to be 4 ages. And there's like the golden age, which is the age of truth, amazing land of milk and honey, the silver age, the bronze age, which had descent, and then there's the Kali Yuga, which is what we are said to be in now. The Kali Yuga, from the goddess Kali, meaning the age of destruction. And that is what they said in the Vedic text, is there would be this age where it would just be like conflict and war and pain and destruction. And then what happens at the end of the Kali Yuga is you go back to the beginning, and then you run these 4 cycles forever and, well, indefinitely. And each cycle is only ended when the incarnation of the Lord Vishnu comes again, and then you go back to the beginning. So this is a Hindu interpretation, but it's in loads of spiritual traditions. Like in Buddhism, they call this age, I think, it's the age of degeneration. It's in loads. In what's it? There's a really good one in the alchemical tradition. It's I'll try and find it and I'll tell you. But anyway, so these were written like thousands of years ago, and they're represented in multiple spiritual traditions. And what that gives me is like a way bigger, wider, and longer perspective of what's actually going on. In fact, I was thinking of you the other day because I was listening to a scientist talk, and he was talking about the concept of deep time, and I'd never heard of it before. And I think, as you're my only scientist friend, apart from my dad, I was like, oh, I bet Jeremy's into deep time. It's a geological concept about how tiny humanity is when you look at like the long span of life of rocks. Like humanity is like teeny tiny little speck. And, these rocks are just these like big grandmothers and grandfathers. And anyway, so it's a similar concept of like understanding in some ways like how insignificant, even it may seem like, this is the most awful stuff that's going on, but actually it's so micro and tiny. That's one thing. And then the other concept with the yugas is this idea of it being cyclical. So in, again, materialist terms, time is linear. So the idea of time is linear, we feel that progress needs to be upwards. Like we have to be getting better and better and better, and we're going to some high point. But in the idea of time being cyclical, this just is. And it's going to get better and it's going to get worse. It's going to get better and it's going to get worse. And having this like broader sense beyond this like humanity being centered and the crises of our time being centered, for me, gives me a lot of, let's say, it just relaxes my whole system. It like relaxes my whole system in the sense that I'm not like gripping onto like, oh my God, things are so terrible. Why are things so terrible? I relax into the fact of like things are just unfolding in the way that they are, and potentially in the way that they should be, if we look at all of these spiritual traditions saying that this is what's going to happen. But then I also know that we as humans have free will. And so if we have free will, it's like, okay, on the one hand, things are unfolding as they should be. But on the other hand, within this big story that I have very little control over, I've got a little bit of free will. And so what am I actually here to do? Like, what have I come here to do? And this comes back to that piece that I said at the beginning, which is like, no matter how much I wish I could just be a hedonist, my heart won't let me. So there is something deeper within us that seeks love, that seeks connection, that seeks harmony, that is hopeful. And so I kind of just, in some ways, I just follow the natural pull of what is, which is that I can't not be hopeful and I can't not be helpful, because when I'm not hopeful, I'm not helpful, I'm in pain. And then I kind of just come to this point of being settled on this like really beautiful alchemy between this is all unfolding as it should be. And I have so much peace with that. And that doesn't mean that I can't still show up and be an agent of love and an agent of hope and an agent of change. And the two somehow just coexist together really, really well when I take that bigger view.
So I'm currently reading a book that you might like. It's called The Fourth Turning. And it's about the idea of cycles and life cycles and how the collective evolves through time as a consequence of the age that we are when these various crisis points hit, right? And so, for example, the crisis now that's going on with, say, the pandemic will have a very different effect on 0 to 20-year-olds, a different effect on 20 to 40-year-olds, different effect on 40 to 60-year-olds, and then the elderly, right? And the idea in the book is that those kids who are being raised now will grow up and they will lead in a different manner than kids that grew up in a different era, that grew up in a different time. So I think you would like that book. It's pretty fascinating. And it talks about the historical and the ancient spiritual texts that also discuss this idea. And, what was I going to say? The way that I sometimes think about the deep time thing is simply zoom out, where I'll remind myself, like, zoom out, man. Zoom out temporally, zoom out geographically, zoom out like universally. Like we're floating around a fireball, like zoom out. And then I remind myself that I saw this really great meme when I started my PhD that I think my supervisor sent me. And it's like a circle. And it's just a circle. And then the next, you turn the page and then it's like zoomed in on the circle and it's zoomed in on the circle. And you keep going and zooming and zooming and zooming. And then eventually there's this like tiny little indentation on the very edge of the circle. And they said, like, that's your PhD. Like, you think that it is this grandiose, all-important project, but really what's happening is that in this very tiny way, you are pushing the capacity for scientific knowledge outward. Like, you are expanding the information, the data, the relevance, the topic, and like you're doing your part in this tiny little way. And if you zoom out collectively, that is how it's always been. And so I like to keep this in mind when I think about kindness and compassion being root solutions to, I think, a lot of the root problems that I see in the world. It's like when you were talking about principles earlier, like, okay, if I can just nudge the circle the tiniest bit to be a little bit more belonging, a little bit more compassion, a little bit more love in the world, and we do this collectively for long enough, that circle will expand. And so I try to remind myself to zoom out. The other thing, and I recognize I'm completely rambling on tangents after tangent right now, is I remind myself of the progress. And so I try to focus on the long-term trajectory of how things are going. And so one example of that, I did a post a couple of weeks ago talking about the idea that children used to be able to work in coal factories for 80 hours a week. And like, you used to legally be allowed to own people, right? And like, women didn't vote. And we used to dump nuclear waste in the rivers. And like, the long-term trajectory is positive, even though at certain points in that trajectory, it feels like everything is falling apart and everything's in crisis. And so this idea of zooming out, I guess, as it relates to deep time.
So this is interesting to jam on. The long-term trajectory is upwards. Maybe, this is my perspective, maybe I have really been, we use this word in my house, my family, Fran-Dugald. It means like, it's a made-up word, but it means like discombobulated, let's say.
Like confused.
So you kind of like, but like spun, like, what? Wait, what? you're like, wait a minute, it's kind of almost more, it's like a mixture between confused and kind of like gobsmacked. There's a bit more kind of shock within it, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah.
So by COVID response, what that has unearthed about what is happening in the like deeper psyche of existence. The long-term trajectory of things is upwards. I think it depends on what level you're plugging into. When I think about like, and if I think about like levels of existence as going from like the most crude, and by that I mean like crude oil, not vulgar, like the most kind of uncomplex to the most like refined complex. And the most refined complex would be like thought or unconscious that we can't even name. So like at a crude level, things are for sure going upwards, right? Less people are living in poverty. You can't own other people. Women have rights. Like the global GDP is going up. Yeah, all of this is certainly true. But at a more like refined, higher level, the intangible stuff, breakdown of community, loss of indigenous wisdoms, creeping, this is from my perspective, right? I know not everyone agrees with this, but like creeping authoritarian rule, surveillance, like all of these things are actually an attack on our humanity at a very, very deep level, such to say that like the fact that we can't own people and that there's less poverty is not necessarily more important than us losing our capacity for freedom, what some people might talk about as like body sovereignty, the right to exist without being surveyed. Like these things are arguably just as much of an attack on our humanity as living in more materially disadvantaged states. So I'm cautious of the narrative that things are getting better.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for that. This is why I like talking to you. So now I'm like, oh, damn, I hadn't considered that fact fully. I was just talking off the top of my head. And as you say, it's just like a cost benefit, all of it, right? It's a trade-off. There are sacrifices. And so, yes, people are in some sense more free in that we don't have slavery, women have rights, etc. But the version of freedom that they're operating in is not what it was 3,000 years ago when we had community, when we genuinely were operating in a different civilization level where we were part of nature, where there was belonging and love and community and security and presence and all of the rest. I don't know what to do with it. I think this is why life is hard.
That it is, and what we definitely don't do with it, which is so there's a kind of like archetypal like impulse to do is to say, let's go back to that. It's like, no. Hold on a minute. Like, we do not want our children to be chimney sweeps. Like, I do not want to be owned by another person. We're not trying to go like pre-modernity, but we're certain, but also, so that's like, when you get people who are like, and actually, maybe I'm going to sound a bit glib here, but like people who are like, I'm just going to like exit myself from the world and live off grid and like not send my children to school and tune in and drop out. And I'm like, sometimes I look at that people, I'm like, yeah, you guys have really got it right, but that's not living within the context of the age that we're in. Like that's not that is an opting out of life. And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong, but it's not everyone can do it. So it's like, we don't want to go, the answer is certainly not, let's go back to the age of golden time when everyone was kind of living in villages and everyone was happy, because that's also not true. Like that, we talked about this before, in that age, in lots of communities, justice was vengeance. Like it was eye for an eye. That was the form of justice. I really don't think many of us want to go back to that. So we have to like look at what the things are that we do have that are, let's say, good, for want of a better word, or like expansive, and what are the things that the unintended consequences that have been born of this age. It's like every age has a shadow side, and then that's always going to happen in some ways. So I think that's like where I'm always cautious of, like, things are getting better or things are getting worse. I wonder whether it's just like things are changing and morphing.
Yeah, things are changing, and it's always been better and it's always been worse, I suppose.
I
When
think
you were
so.
talking about going back to the village community, I thought, oh yeah, that sounds amazing. We just lay around and pick apples from the tree all day. And then I was like, wait, there's famine and war and disease and all kinds of uncertainties, right?
Yeah, I pick apples from the tree all day until it's like, oh, I'm 19. It's probably my life expectancy now. Time to go.
Or like, oh, it's winter now. There's no apples for 6 months or whatever. Like, we have to eat
Yeah,
stored
yeah.
potatoes for 4 months. Earlier, you mentioned, like, I can't believe I'm going to say this, or I don't want to say this, but I'll say it later. Did you say that thing, or did you skip
Oh,
it?
no, I didn't. Okay, so I just gotta. I'm practicing like courage through truth. So I got to say it, but I don't say it because I think, oh, people will think, God, what an awful person. But I tell you honestly that I, because I think about these things so much, borderline obsessively, about kind of like the unfolding of existence, and um, the I feel that the way that we are, so whilst I can say, we don't want to go back to that, my heart does break by it, from the way that we are living now, in many ways, like so disconnected, so like mechanistically, just like born, live, work, die, um, the vast things of inequality, repeating the same patterns of oppression, da da da. And there's and the ways that we have to deal with these things don't seem to be fixing them. So when COVID first hit, there was a big part of me that was actually like excited by the global crisis. I was like, yes, because this is a huge fucking pattern disrupt. And the reason I'm kind of like, I get scared to say that is because when you say things, people want to hear what you're. We live in a world where it's like people like to be outraged. So a way you could interpret me saying that is like, well, Holidays doesn't care about like the deaths that happen and like how selfish and da 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 da, which is not true. But I can only be honest about, that was one of the most significant ways I felt. I was like, wow, like kind of like, thank God something has come in to just slice through normality, because normality is not working for most people. And I was hopeful, and I took the view that crises have, what's the word? It's not victims. What's the word? What would be the word in war if you have lots of people who die? Casualties. Was that, yeah, crises have casualties, but normality has more casualties. It has like the lives of thousands, about like not even thinking about inequality and it has lives of thousands of people feeling like their lives are unlived because we are so disconnected, because we are so apathetic, because we are so just on this autopilot of this kind of weird treadmill of life. So I felt kind of excited by it. That was the thing that I was like, oh, I don't know if I can say that, because people go very up in arms about such things. And then, but then do I think it has? I think it's changed the course of history forever, for sure. I think it has made people in a significant way think about like how they want to be living their lives in relation to work. Like, think about people who've spent their whole lives like getting up at 6 a.m., like getting on a crowded train, going to a job that they hate, sitting in a cubicle, like coming home, like having a beer and just like slowly dying. What is it? What was it? That guy said, the one who wrote Walden, men live lives of quiet desperation. So just the very nature of people not having to do that has led to this thing. I don't know if you're having it in the US, but we have it, the Great Resignation. Like, people literally looking at like, I'm not fucking living this way. This is not what it means to be human. So I think that's significant. Like, I think these things that are happening are significant. I think there are conversations that are being had, certainly in the circles that I roll in, around like, what do we actually value as society? So like, I did a video, another one which I was really scared to put out, about vaccination. I'm going to precursor this by saying that I'm vaccinated. I don't feel like I should have to say it, but I feel like I will, because I know that if people don't know that, they might just switch off and be like, she's some crazy anti-vaxxer. I'm vaccinated. Ocean has his like MMR vaccinations. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. That being said, I'm deeply against vaccine mandates because I think that they force a value system on people when we have not, as a world, had a conversation about our value system and the value system that lockdowns and vaccinations preserve. I think is that the top value is preservation of life. Like, we will preservation or elongation even of life is the most important thing. That may well be the value system that we want to put at the top, but we've not even had the opportunity to discuss that, which is why you have people who are anti-vaccine mandate who are like, no way, liberty is the top value. And then those people, then you get this polarization of people being like, you're a terrible person, you don't care about people dying, and like, or like, you're a sheeple, you don't care about liberty. And we're not having this conversation, which is like, of course we hold different values as humans. Of course we do. And I don't know how I kind of got to that, but I have no idea how I got to that. But I'm very fired up about that because I think that that's also changing the course of history. Like, people, we can see how deeply how far the value systems are apart. And I actually think that this particular issue, more than Brexit, more than Trump, is like the most fundamental split in values of like liberty, personal sovereignty versus the commons, and kind of preservation of life. I think that's huge. And I'm sad that we're not having a conversation on a big scale on that level. And instead, we're just collapsing into kind of name calling and thinking the other side is either like a kind of idiot who's just following the mainstream media, but really they don't understand that everyone's a lizard or whatever, versus like, you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist.
So where do we go from here?
Gosh, I don't know.
When are you running for Prime Minister, Holiday?
I would never. Lots of people have said to me before, like, you should go into politics, and I would never. I'm way too much of a liability. And my dad was a politician, so I actually see how you have to, how moderate you have to end up becoming. Although that is different now because we have this crazy polarization, so you probably could be an extremist. Where do we go? That was a bit of a weird tangent. But where do we go?
I guess one thing to like throw your way in lieu of that question, or perhaps as context, is one thing that came up for me as you were saying that is the idea of exposure. And I feel like the crisis or the crises really effectively exposes what our society values, prioritizes. It exposes our fragilities collectively and individually. It exposes everything that's going on below the surface that can be hidden in the good times. And so, for example, countless people lost their jobs, and there is no social safety net for them to eat or feed their families or live, right? The healthcare system was exposed for its fragilities. Our own insecurities and fears and shames were exposed at a very open level by the public discourse and the media and how we treat each other. And so I feel like, in one sense, to go back to what we were speaking to earlier, that the crisis exposes everything. It's like radical honesty. It's like bringing the shadow into the light. And it's just saying, okay, this is actually what you are. This is actually what exists. And now, in theory, we can all agree and we can all no longer hide from those truths. And then it's like, okay, what do we do with this? Like, how can we use this? The idea that came up years ago was in the South Pacific and a tsunami struck, and they were talking about how you should never waste a crisis, that it's actually an opportunity in a sense. It's an invitation to build back better was the common phrase that was going around. So maybe with that as some context, how do we fix the world, Holiday Phillips?
Couple of things that come to mind. I mean, first thing that I would say is that we pause. So it's like if we think about who is it who said, the philosopher who I love, Bayo Akomolafe, he said something like, our solutions to the problems are part of the problem. It's the same line of thinking as Einstein, like can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it. So it's like, how do we, if part of the problem is do, fix, control, fight, war on, then a new level of consciousness, okay, we've realized what the things are, let's go do, fix, control, eliminate, is kind of the same consciousness. So there's an argument for saying that now we pause and see what emerges. I think kind of concurrent to that, which I think might be one of the things that we've seen from the pandemic is the actual decentering of humans. So we're talking about the yugas, another theory of ages is this theory that we're in an age called the Anthropocene, which is the age where ages where humans have so dominated the so-called natural world that we descend into crisis. So that's obviously what's happening now. And there's a theory, I think, that says that the pandemic humbled us in a sense where like a virus actually became the top of the power structure. And so there's another argument to say that it isn't for us to do and to fix and to like build back better, but it's for us to kind of be, how might we say, to recenter other forms of life, like animals, plants, viruses, fungi. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, because as a person who grew up in like a city in London in the UK, I don't have that. I don't have that kind of experience and knowledge to say what that really looks like to actually decenter humans and recenter non-human life. But of course, there are tons of Indigenous communities for whom that is their way. So there's certainly a thread that I'd be interested in exploring of like, what does it mean actually to bring our humans back into balance with the rest of the world? That being one of the things that the pandemic was showing us, that we actually are not all powerful. Man is not the measure of all things. Francis Bacon said that man is the measure of all things. Or no, but did he say our job is to like destroy the mysteries of the natural world, something like that? And that's kind of how we live. Like since the age of enlightenment, it's like we are the center. So I think there's something there, and that requires us to listen to other forms of wisdom And then maybe the other thing I think is, no, I think those are the two things that I think, that we're being invited to pause and we're being invited to listen to other forms of wisdom that are not this, how do I fix, control, eliminate with my mind? And probably you and I are not the people who are going to have that wisdom, but we should still talk about it, definitely, because why not? But it's probably going to come from different voices.
I was going to add a third idea, which is to feel. It's like really feel and drop in that pause, to like look around and really feel what's going on. I had Michael Gay on the podcast, and he was talking about masculinity and modern man, males in particular. And he said, we just need to pause and actually reflect that something has gone awry. And like when you pause and really feel that I think is an important component towards moving forward, right? Of like, when you look around and really take that all in, it's like something's happened here over the last several thousand years. And like, perhaps now is a good way to begin a different kind of dialogue, so to speak, a different path forward, right? To your point. I was going to ask, have you ever read Daniel Quinn's work, Ishmael in particular? I think you'd like it. It's a giant. What's that?
Whale.
No, it's a gorilla.
Oh, then no. I'm thinking of Moby Dick.
Moby Dick, call me Ishmael. Yeah, the first line. So Ishmael, it's a great book, and Daniel Quinn's work is really profound and very easy to read. And one idea that he talks about in particular is that there's basically two ways of living. There's givers and there's takers. And he describes modern man, all of our various economies and civilizations and societies, 99.99 are takers. Like, we pillage the land, we take what we need. We're not living collaboratively with nature. And then the other idea is givers, which were the indigenous cultures, the ancient wisdom, the lineages, where they give and take, and they give and take, and they give back to the land, and they recognize their place in the world, etc. And I think, to your point, this seems like a useful starting place. Like, how can we give a little bit more of the land, of each other, of ourselves, to try to make some meaning in these various crises?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And I think one of the things that just kind of occurs to me is like, I'm very new to kind of this particular body of work, or like study in my own life about the tension between indigenous culture wisdoms and modern Western wisdoms. It's something that I'm only just at the beginning of my journey of understanding. But I do think there's something, because it could almost recreate the kind of same pattern that there's emerged in kind of racial conversations between white people and Black people, where it's like a kind of like pedestaling of like, I don't know anything, like kind of like a weird concept of like this noble savage, which I really felt after the George Floyd thing, in that weird power dynamic was kind of created. And then white people were kind of denigrating themselves and like, oh, I can't be in any conversation, and I'm so small. And I don't think that was a good thing. But I wonder whether there's a same thing here, which is to say, like, we may not have the lineage of those wisdoms. However, we are all land beings. So it's like we all have a connection to the land that were born on, and we all have bodies that are part of the natural world. And I wonder whether there's like two streams there. There are deep wisdoms that are being eroded and lost, that would live in indigenous cultures, that we need to listen to, because we've lost that. We in this, let's say in the UK, have lost that wisdom. But there's also the body wisdom that we all have, which is like, what is it actually to be in a body on land? And you're always going on your walks in nature. And I love seeing it on Instagram. And it's like, I think there's also something there so that we don't abdicate responsibility completely and be like, well, I can't know what it is to be a body of the land, because we do know. We do know.
Yeah. And I know you're a fan of Charles Eisenstein also. I think I saw him quoted on your website, but I had him on the podcast talking about this book title of his, which was The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And I think one of my main takeaways from that book was he pretty much says, like, I don't know how to make that world. Like, there is no action plan. There is no 12-step framework. I literally don't know. But what I do know, and I'm just paraphrasing the general idea, is what I do know is that, like, each of us individually can help to create that in our own special way. Like, our world needs painters, and it needs accountants, and it needs teachers, and it needs talkers, and it needs, farmers. And so when we're living in that way, perhaps with the collective in mind, and to your point about feeling genuinely in our bodies and in our truth and in our purpose, perhaps that's a compromise of sorts in terms of how to move forward.
Yeah. And this, I think, is a conversation for a whole other podcast. But the real kicker is that we have to do all of that without moralizing, without making it like we may be, okay, I'm trying to create the more beautiful world that my heart knows is possible by being good to my brothers and my sisters and kind of like connecting with the land. And I have to do all of that without seeing myself as this great person and everyone else who's not doing this is some heathen. Like, whew, that's really the hard part, because that's if we think about, go back to the beginning thing we're talking about, like, what's the thing at the root that ties all of these crises together? It's separation from ourselves, from each other, from the earth. And every single time we try and create the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible by separating ourselves from others, by saying, oh, look how good I am. I'm trying to create the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Like, ooh, I'm so great. We're just doing the same thing again. And I think that's the piece that is really, at least in my life, like, that's the work that I'm about. Like, how do I continue to kind of become a more, let's say, whole, evolved, loving version of myself without becoming superior? I think that'll be the rest of my life's work.
I 100% agree. To rein in the righteousness.
Yeah, because it's so fun.
Oh, you smoke cigarettes and eat Doritos? Like, oh, I'm better than you. I had some spinach last night. Or like, oh, you're mean to your mom? Like, I love my mom. I'm way better than you are, right? Because that's exactly right. There's this thread of separation. I think he talks about the illusion of separation, right? That underlines or that threads through our society. And it's like, no, it's not that. It's cohesive, collective, belonging, love, accepting. It's like, cool, you want to smoke cigarettes? Knock yourself out. You want to do lines of Doritos off of a Twinkie? Like, knock yourself out, man. Go for it. It's cool, right?
Yeah.
And then that is perhaps the monumental tectonic shift that might occur and really influence some stuff.
I think so.
I think so too, but who knows? I don't know shit to tie this all to the beginning.
It's like we've solved it, and also we don't know anything.
That seems very reasonable, and also I have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah,
I've done this before. Holiday Phillips, I adore you, and I appreciate the way your brain and heart works, and the work that you're doing in the world, truly. And it's always a pleasure to chat. But for those listening, where can they find you? I know you've got a website and an Instagram account. Is there other places?
Best place to find me is on Instagram. So I'm all my kind of talks or poetry, like musings, all goes onto Instagram. And then if you want to like work with me more directly, then go onto my, just DM me on Instagram or go onto my website and you can see some of the other stuff that I do. But yeah, best way.
You work with like businesses and corporations as well. Are you still doing that work? Like
Yeah, yeah, I do.
diversity, inclusion, all that stuff?
Yeah, I work with businesses around building cultures of inclusion, diversity, kind of decolonizing the workplace. Yeah, it's so funny because sometimes I think I did a post one time when someone was like gone on the website and they were like, you work, because I work with like some real like serious organizations. And they was like, I can't believe that you do that. I thought you were just, as they said to me, I thought you were just a strange internet panda who talked about love a lot. And I love that so much. I was like, yeah, I am a strange internet panda who talks about love, but I'm also like an actual person who works with like actual organizations.
Yeah. Trying to create that world we talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I will put those links in the show notes. If you're listening, go follow Holiday, get in her life. If you're the CEO of PepsiCo, hire her. And hopefully I'll see you in June when I'm in
Yeah,
England.
no doubt.
We'll hang out and I'll hold your boy. That'll be fun.
Yes, and because you're doing a workshop, no, in England.
Yeah, hopefully.
You can come and if you're British and you're listening to this and you want to hang with me and Jeremy, I'm gonna be at that workshop.
Yeah. We just need to find a space. I think I messaged you about that. Like, do you know a yoga?
I owe you.
Anyway, so if you're listening and you're in London and you know a workshop space, send me a message. Get me out there. Okay, that's really it. Thank you again. I love you. I adore you. And it's always good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
So that was Holiday Phillips. I hope you enjoyed our meandering, random, tangential, philosophical conversation about the state of the world, history, and the future. Obviously, this is a very nuanced conversation filled with uncertainty and a tremendous amount of unknowns. Like, we're doing our best to work through this stuff as individuals and as a collective who is connected to one another. And I hope you appreciate the conversation. Hope you have some questions to ponder, some new ideas to implement, and I hope you, like us, try to fumble and stumble your way towards a more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. And if you want, you can check that podcast out with Charles Eisenstein. He is a big thinker, a beautiful writer. And as mentioned, you can get into Holiday's sphere online and on Instagram. I've included links to that in the show notes if you want to check out her work and her words and her writing. She's great. And you're great also. Thank you for being here. If you want, you can find me online at Long Distance Love Bombs. I send out a weekly newsletter, hosting some retreats upcoming at the end of the year in Costa Rica. And me and Trey Verboom are off to Europe in June and July. So we'll be in Amsterdam, London, and Edinburgh, Scotland. If you want to come and hang out with me in person, get in touch, keep me posted, and if you have any ideas or suggestions, do let me know. Thanks for sharing the pod. Thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you soon.